The sound that shattered my life wasn't a gunshot or a siren. It was a soft, desperate thump against my front door in the dead of night. At 72 years old, you think you've seen the worst the world has to offer. You think you've built walls strong enough to protect the only thing you have left. But when I opened that door at 1 a.m., I saw my beautiful daughter, Lily, crumpled on my doorstep, her face a canvas of purple and blue, her wedding dress torn. The man who had vowed to protect her, my son-in-law, had done this. He had beaten her for another woman. In that moment, the quiet, retired man I had become died, and something far older, far colder, took his place. This isn't just a story about heartbreak. It's about what a father will do when his world is destroyed, and the methodical, soul-crushing revenge he will exact to salt the earth where his enemy stands. The old house was silent, as it usually is at that hour. The only sound was the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a steady heartbeat counting down the moments of my life. I was in my study, a glass of fine scotch in my hand, swirling the amber liquid as I stared at a photograph on my desk. It was of my late wife, Helen. 20 years gone, and the ache was still a phantom limb, a part of me I reached for that was no longer there. Lily, our daughter, had her mother's eyes, that same gentle spirit. It was the only thing that kept the loneliness from consuming me whole. That's when I heard it. It wasn't a knock. It was a thump, a heavy, soft, final kind of sound, like a sack of grain being dropped. My heart, a sluggish old pump, gave a painful lurch. Nothing good happens at 1 a.m. I set the glass down, my hands steady despite the sudden tremor in my soul, and moved through the darkened house. Each tick of the clock seemed to grow louder, a drumbeat of impending doom. I reached the heavy oak door and flipped on the porch light. The world outside was painted in a sickly yellow glow. Through the peephole, I saw nothing but my manicured hedges. But I knew something was there. The weight of that sound was still hanging in the air. I drew a breath, turned the deadbolt, and pulled the door inward, and my world ended. She was curled on the doormat like a wounded animal, my Lily. Her beautiful blonde hair was matted with something dark. One side of her face was swollen beyond recognition, the skin a grotesque tapestry of purple, blue, and angry red. Her lip was split, and a trickle of dried blood ran from her nose to her chin. But the most horrifying part, the detail that seared itself into my memory like a branding iron, was what she was wearing. It was the simple, elegant white dress she'd worn to her rehearsal dinner just 2 years ago, a symbol of hope and new beginnings, now torn at the shoulder and stained with dirt and blood. "Lily!" My voice was a croak, a sound I didn't recognize. She stirred, a low moan escaping her battered lips. She tried to push herself up, but her arms gave way. I dropped to my knees, the old joints screaming in protest, and gathered her into my arms. She was so light, so fragile. The scent of her perfume was mixed with the metallic tang of blood and something else, the cheap, cloying scent of another woman's fragrance. "Dad," she whispered, her voice hoarse and broken. He... Shh, baby girl. Don't talk. I've got you." I lifted her as gently as I could. She weighed nothing. Inside, I laid her on the large sofa in the living room, the one Helen had picked out decades ago. Her body seemed so small against the vastness of the cushions. I ran to the kitchen, my mind a whirlwind of panic and a cold, rising fury. I grabbed a wet cloth and a first aid kit. As I gently dabbed at her face, trying to clean the blood away, she flinched. Her one good eye opened, swimming with tears. "He found out," she choked out. "Found out what, honey? What happened?" The messages. I found them, on his phone." Her breath hitched in a sob. "A woman from his office, Bianca Reyes. For months, Dad. He's been lying to me for months." The name hung in the air. Ethan Cole, my son-in-law, the man I had welcomed into my family, the charismatic, ambitious young real estate developer who had charmed my daughter and promised me he would cherish her. I had handed him the keys to my legacy, not just my daughter, but connections, introductions. I'd seen him as the son I never had, a fool. I had been an old, sentimental fool. He was supposed to be at a conference in Chicago, she continued, her voice trembling. But he never went. He was with her, in the apartment I decorated, in our bed. The last words were a shard of glass in the quiet room. I confronted him tonight. I packed a bag. I told him I was leaving. He laughed at me, Dad. He told me I was nothing without him, that our life, this house, it was all because of him. A coldness was spreading through my chest, extinguishing the panic and leaving behind something hard and dense, like a block of granite. Fury, pure, undiluted, and patient. He told me I wasn't to tell you, she whispered, her gaze dropping to the floor. He said you were an old man, and he was the future, that he could ruin my reputation, make it look like I was the one who was unstable. She took a shuddering breath. And then, he grabbed my phone. He saw that I tried to call you. He just snapped. He threw me against the wall. He said I was trying to ruin him. She started to cry then, not loud sobs, but the quiet, hopeless weeping of someone whose spirit had been shattered. He kept hitting me, Dad. He said he was tired of my mother's memory, tired of living in your shadow. He called me weak. Then he dragged me out, threw me in my car and told me to run home to my daddy. I looked at my daughter's broken face, the face I had protected from scraped knees and teenage heartbreaks, the face that was a perfect blend of my own, and the woman I had loved more than life itself. And in that moment I felt a shift within me. The retired contractor, the quiet widower, the grandfather in waiting, he vanished. Left in his place was Robert Miller, the man who had built a construction empire from dirt and grit, the man who had stared down union bosses, broken crooked politicians, and buried competitors who thought he was just a simple builder. That man hadn't gone away. He had merely been sleeping. I picked up my phone and dialed 911. As I spoke to the dispatcher, my voice was calm, unnervingly so. I gave them the details. I told them my daughter had been assaulted. After I hung up, I knelt beside Lily again. I took her hand. It was cold. He's right about one thing, honey, I said, my voice low and even, a strange counterpoint to the storm raging inside me. You did run home to your daddy. I squeezed her hand gently. And your daddy is going to fix this. I am going to burn his entire world to the ground. He will have nothing left but the ashes of the life he stole from you, and he will spend the rest of his days choking on them. Lily looked at me, her tear-filled eye widening slightly. She saw it then, the change in me, the sleeping giant that her husband, in his arrogance, had just awoken. The wail of distant sirens began to cut through the night. It was the sound of the old world ending and a new, terrible one beginning. It was the overture to Ethan Cole's demise. And I, Robert Miller, would be the conductor. The hospital was a sterile, impersonal hell. The fluorescent lights hummed a monotonous tune, and the air smelled of antiseptic and quiet suffering. Lily had a concussion, 2 cracked ribs, and a fractured cheekbone. The doctor, a young man with tired eyes, spoke to me in hushed tones about recovery times and the importance of a safe environment. A safe environment. The words were a mockery. While Lily slept, sedated, and mercifully free from pain for a few hours, I sat in the hard plastic chair beside her bed and made a call. The name on my contact list was simply Chen. David Chen was not a man you found in the yellow pages. He was a ghost, a whisper in the circles of power where I had once moved. Ex-military intelligence, now a private consultant for a very select, very wealthy clientele. He found things, secrets, leverage. He was expensive, discreet, and utterly ruthless in his pursuit of information. I had used him twice before in my career to dismantle hostile takeover attempts. He was a scalpel, and I was about to perform surgery. Robert, his voice was calm and smooth, betraying no surprise at a call made at 3 a.m. It's been a long time. I need you, David, I said, my voice a low growl. This is not business. This is personal. I told him everything. I didn't embellish. The truth was ugly enough. I could hear him typing softly on his end of the line. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. The son-in-law's name is Ethan Cole, David said, his tone shifting from professional courtesy to focused intensity. Associated with the development firm Apex Global. Ambitious. A bit of a peacock. I've heard the name. The mistress is Bianca Reyes, a senior legal counsel at the same firm. This is sloppy, Robert. Arrogant. I don't want him embarrassed, David, I said, my knuckles white as I gripped the phone. I don't want him divorced and paying alimony. I want him destroyed. I want him erased. I want his name to be a cautionary tale whispered by interns. Understood, David said. I need everything you have. Bank accounts you know of, social circles, habits, friends. Give me a thread, and I'll unravel his entire life. I want more than that, I said. I don't just want to know what he's done. I want to know what he wants. What is his dream? What is the one thing he craves more than anything else in the world? There was another pause. You're not just looking for a weapon, Robert. You're looking for the blueprint to build a trap. Exactly, I said. Build me the trap, David. I'll handle the rest. For the next week, while Lily recovered at my house, a prisoner in a fortress of her own trauma, I became a general planning a war. My quiet study, once a place of reflection, was transformed into a command center. A steady stream of encrypted emails began to arrive from Chen. They were a portrait of a man rotten to the core. Ethan wasn't just a cheater, he was a fraud. He had leveraged his connection to me to secure loans and partnerships his own merit could never have justified. He was living far beyond his means, leasing extravagant cars and a penthouse apartment for his mistress, all funded by a precarious tower of debt and risky investments. He was a house of cards, and a strong wind would bring it all down. But that was too simple, too quick. I didn't want him to collapse. I wanted him to climb higher and higher, right before I kicked the ladder out from under him and dismantled the entire structure on his way down. Chen's real genius was in uncovering the answer to my question. What did Ethan Cole want? The answer came in a file labeled Project Zenith. It was Ethan's obsession, his Moby Dick. A proposal for a landmark skyscraper downtown, a shimmering glass and steel monument to his own ego. It was an audacious, eye-wateringly expensive project that had been rejected by every major investor in the city as being too risky, too grandiose. The zoning was a nightmare, the land acquisition was a tangled mess, and the upfront capital required was astronomical. But Ethan believed it was his destiny, his ticket to the big leagues, the thing that would finally get him out of my shadow and make the name Cole synonymous with the city's skyline. Bianca Reyes, the mistress, was a key player in this fantasy. She was the legal mind, finding loopholes and drafting aggressive proposals to make the project seem plausible. They were a team, a modern-day Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, fueled by avarice and ambition. As I read through the detailed projections and architectural fantasies, a plan began to form in my mind. It was cold, intricate, and utterly cruel. It would use Ethan's own dream as the weapon of his destruction. He wanted to build a legacy. I would give him the opportunity. I would help him lay the foundation, and then I would bury him in it. I spent my days with Lily, coaxing her to eat, watching old movies with her, or just sitting in silence as she stared out the window. The bruises on her face began to fade, but the ones on her soul were still raw. She spoke of her marriage in fractured pieces, a puzzle of small betrayals and casual cruelties that, when assembled, revealed the monster she had married. She blamed herself, of course. She'd been blind. She'd made excuses for him. "I should have seen it, Dad," she said one afternoon, her voice barely a whisper. "No, sweetheart," I told her, my heart aching. "You saw the man you wanted to see. You loved him. That's not a weakness. The weakness was his. The evil was his." But every night after she had taken her sleeping pills and the house fell quiet, I would retreat to my study. The man who comforted Lily would recede, and the architect of ruin would take over. I reactivated dormant shell corporations I hadn't used in years. I made calls to old contacts, men who owed me favors, men who understood the value of discretion and loyalty. I began to move my pieces across the board. I was going to build Ethan Cole his dream, and every single nail, every pane of glass, and every ton of steel would be a part of the cage I was constructing around him. He wouldn't see the bars until it was far too late. He would be so blinded by the sun reflecting off his glorious tower that he would never notice the abyss opening up at his feet. To catch a shark, you don't use a worm, you use a bleeding tuna. Ethan Cole was a shark, and Project Zenith was his tuna. The problem was, he knew I was his father-in-law. Any investment vehicle with my name, or the name of any of my known associates, would send him running. The bait had to come from a source so pristine, so powerful, and so far removed from my orbit that he would never suspect a thing. This required an artist's touch. My first call was to a man named Gregory Finch, a retired investment banker living in Zurich. Greg and I went back 40 years. I had helped his son out of a serious jam involving a collapsed construction project in Dubai, saving the family from ruin and public disgrace. He owed me a debt he had always sworn to repay. "Robert," he said, his voice a gravelly mix of English and German accents, "to what do I owe the pleasure? I hope you are not calling to tell me you are finally taking up yodeling." "I need a ghost, Greg," I said, cutting to the chase. "A corporate entity, untraceable, impeccable credentials. Based out of Switzerland, of course. It needs to look like old conservative money looking for a high-yield, legacy investment in North American real estate." I could almost hear him smile through the phone. "A ghost, you say? Are we haunting someone?" "We're building a cathedral," I replied, "for a man to be buried in." Within a week, Helvetia Heritage Holdings was born. It was a masterpiece of corporate misdirection. Its board of directors consisted of names that were either deceased or fictional. Its physical address was a high-end law firm in Geneva with impenetrable privacy policies, and its financial backing was a complex web of my own offshore accounts, funneled through 3 different countries before landing in a Zurich bank. Helvetia was a phantom with a billion-dollar wallet. The next step was to find a front man, a face for our phantom. Chen's research provided the perfect candidate, a man named Sebastian Lowe. Lowe was a once brilliant, now disgraced project manager from London. He'd been at the top of his game until a gambling addiction and a nasty divorce had left him broke and desperate. Crucially, he had a history of clashing with Ethan's firm, Apex Global, on a past project. He had the expertise, a believable grudge, and, most importantly, a price. Chen found him managing a dingy construction site in Manchester. I flew to London myself, meeting him not in a boardroom, but in a gritty pub that smelled of stale beer and regret. Lowe was a husk of the man in his file photos. His suit was frayed, his eyes were haunted. But when I laid out the proposal, a spark of the old intelligence returned. "Let me get this straight," he said, nursing a pint. "You want me to be the public face of a mysterious Swiss firm? You want me to approach Ethan Cole, a man I despise, and present him with the opportunity to build his dream project? You'll provide all the capital, all the resources. My job is to be the liaison and take your instructions?" "That's the gist of it," I said. "What's the catch? And why him?" "The catch is you follow my script to the letter. No deviations. You report only to me through encrypted channels. As for why, let's just say Mr. Cole has a debt to pay. This project will be his payment. This is revenge," he stated, his eyes searching mine. "This is a rebalancing of the scales," I corrected him. "Your compensation will be enough to clear your debts and retire to a sunny beach for the rest of your life. All you have to do is play your part." He stared into his beer for a long time, the ghosts of his past failures swirling in his mind. Then he looked up at me, his jaw set. "Where do I sign?" The stage was now set. Sebastian Lowe, representing the impossibly wealthy and reclusive Helvetia Heritage Holdings, sent a formal letter of interest to Ethan Cole's office at Apex Global. The letter was a work of art, dripping with corporate jargon and casual mentions of multi-billion-dollar projects in Asia and the Middle East. It stated that Helvetia was looking to make a significant, singular investment in a North American city, and that their research had identified Project Zenith as a high-potential venture, should the right leadership team be in place. Chen had a man on the inside at Apex, a disgruntled IT technician. We knew the exact moment the letter arrived. Ethan, we were told, initially dismissed it as a prank. It was too good to be true. But Bianca Reyes, his clever, venomous partner, urged him to look deeper. They ran a background check on Helvetia Heritage Holdings. What they found was exactly what Greg Finch and I had designed, a fortress of legitimacy. Swiss banking secrecy laws meant they hit a brick wall trying to identify the principals, but the firm's stated capital reserves were verified by a top-tier Zurich bank. They looked into Sebastian Lowe and saw a seasoned professional with a legitimate reason to be a free agent. The pieces fit. A week later, Lowe, dressed in a new, impeccably tailored suit I had purchased for him, met with Ethan and Bianca in the Apex Global boardroom. I was in a hotel room a few blocks away, listening in via a microphone in Lowe's tie pin. Ethan was cautious at first, a predator circling a potential meal. But Lowe was brilliant. He played the part of the slightly arrogant, world-weary representative of old money perfectly. He talked about risk mitigation and long-term value, using phrases that made Ethan's corporate bravado sound childish. "My employers are not venture capitalists, Mr. Cole," Lowe said, his voice smooth and confident. "They do not gamble. They build legacies. They see potential in your vision for the Zenith Tower, but they have serious reservations about your firm's capacity to handle a project of this magnitude alone." This was the first part of the hook, designed to needle Ethan's ego. "Apex Global is one of the fastest-growing firms in the country," Ethan countered, his voice tight. "And we commend your ambition," Lowe replied dismissively. "But ambition does not pour concrete. Helvetia is prepared to fully fund the acquisition of the land parcels in the first phase of construction, a sum of, let's say, $200 million to start. However, we would require a significant personal commitment from you and your partners at Apex. We need to know you have skin in the game." This was the second part of the hook. Not only was the dream real, but it demanded he go all in. I could hear the greed and excitement creeping into Ethan's voice as he spoke. He was practically salivating. "What kind of personal commitment are we talking about?" Bianca asked, ever the lawyer. "To secure our backing, we would expect Apex and its principal partners to secure a secondary line of credit against your own company's assets," Lowe said coolly. "And we would need you, Mr. Cole, personally to sign as a guarantor, a demonstration of your unwavering belief in the project." It was an outrageous request under normal circumstances. Asking a CEO to personally guarantee a loan of that size using his company's assets was unheard of. It was corporate suicide if the project went south. But I wasn't dealing with a rational actor. I was dealing with a narcissist whose entire self-worth was tied to this one grandiose vision. There was a pause on the other end. I held my breath. I could picture them in that boardroom, the city skyline behind them, the model of the Zenith Tower on the table between them like a golden idol. Then Ethan spoke, and his voice was filled with the kind of arrogant certainty that only a fool possesses. "When do we start?" I leaned back in my chair and allowed myself a small, cold smile. The shark had not just seen the bait, he had swallowed it, hook, line, and sinker. The deal was signed a month later. It was a lavish affair at a downtown hotel, complete with champagne, media, and speeches about the future of the city. I watched it on the local news from the comfort of my study. There was Ethan, beaming at the cameras, his arm around Bianca Reyes. They were introduced as the power duo behind the project. My daughter's name was never mentioned. He looked like a king who had just conquered a new land. In reality, he was a prisoner, happily signing his own death warrant. The documents he'd signed were a legal labyrinth, crafted by the best corporate lawyers my money could buy. Buried deep in the sub-clauses and addendums were tripwires and poison pills, strict performance benchmarks, penalty clauses for delays, and most importantly, a clause that gave Helvetia Heritage Holdings the right to call for an immediate, independent audit of all project finances at any time. The personal guarantee Ethan had signed was ironclad. If the project failed, he wouldn't just lose his company, he would be personally liable for the hundreds of millions invested. He was pledging a fortune he didn't have. In the beginning, we made it easy for him. The first $100 million from Helvetia arrived in an Apex-controlled account on time, to the exact penny. Sebastian Lowe was the perfect partner, providing advice, smoothing over initial permit issues with the city, thanks to a few well-placed phone calls I made to old friends on the zoning board, and praising Ethan's visionary leadership in emails that were CC'd to the Apex Board of Directors. Ethan was euphoric. He was no longer just a rising star. He was the sun around which the entire city's development community now revolved. He and Bianca were the toast of the town, their affair now an open secret, framed as a dynamic professional partnership. They bought a new condo together, a monument of glass and steel overlooking the very site where the Zenith Tower would one day stand. He called Lily, of course, not to apologize, but to gloat. He told her he was filing for divorce. He offered her a pittance of a settlement, warning her that if she fought it, his lawyers would drag her through the mud. Lily came to me that night, her face pale. "He's trying to erase me, Dad. He wants to act like the last 5 years never happened." "He is erasing himself, sweetheart," I told her, my voice calm. "He just doesn't know it yet. Let his lawyers do what they want. You and I are going to focus on you." We hired the best divorce attorney in the state. I told her to spare no expense, to fight for every single thing Lily was entitled to. It wasn't about the money, it was about forcing Ethan to see his marriage, his betrayal, quantified in legal documents, a paper trail of his monstrousness. Meanwhile, Project Zenith was moving forward at a blistering pace. The land was acquired. Demolition crews cleared the site. It was a gaping hole in the heart of the city, a promise of the greatness to come. The media loved it. Ethan was on the cover of local business magazines, hailed as a titan of industry. I gave him a golden shovel. Not literally, of course, but every move I made was designed to make him dig his own grave deeper. I had Lowe suggest an aggressive construction timeline. My employers are very keen on seeing a tangible return on their investment sooner rather than later, Ethan. They feel the market is prime, and delays could be costly. To meet this timeline, Ethan had to hire more expensive, non-union crews. He had to pay premiums for expedited steel and concrete deliveries. The budget began to swell. Next, Lowe presented a new opportunity. "Helvetia has been looking at the pre-leasing figures," he'd say in their meetings, which I continued to monitor. "We feel the initial design is perhaps a bit modest. We believe adding another 10 floors, focusing on luxury residential penthouses, could double the project's final valuation." Ethan, his ego already inflated to bursting, saw nothing but dollar signs and a taller monument to himself. He never questioned why the investors were suddenly so keen on changing the plans midstream. He agreed immediately. The redesign cost millions and added months to the permit process. More money bled from the budget. To cover the shortfalls, he did exactly what I knew he would. He started cutting corners. Not on the surface, where inspectors would see, but deep inside the project's foundations. He signed off on using slightly lower-grade rebar from a cheaper supplier. He approved a concrete mix that wasn't quite up to the new, more stringent codes for a building of that revised height. Each of these decisions was a thread in the web I was weaving. David Chen's operatives, posing as construction workers and safety inspectors, documented every single violation, complete with photographs and falsified signatures on the supply manifests. Ethan also started dipping into the company's operating funds to cover the Zenith project's ballooning costs, borrowing from other, smaller projects Apex was running. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul, convinced that the final payoff from Zenith would cover all his sins. Bianca, his legal eagle, helped him paper over the illegal fund transfers, creating a dizzying maze of intercompany loans and creative accounting. They were both so intoxicated by their ascent that they didn't realize they were in a nosedive. One evening, I drove down to the construction site myself. I stood across the street, a shadow among the evening commuters, and looked at the enormous pit in the ground. A forest of steel rebar reached for the sky like skeletal fingers. The hum of generators and the clang of metal filled the air. This was his dream, and I was its sole architect. I thought of Lily, who had started painting again. Her first canvas was a swirl of dark, angry colors, a storm of emotion. But her latest one had a small patch of blue in the corner, a sliver of hope. Seeing that small patch of blue was worth more to me than all the money I was pouring into this charade. Ethan Cole thought he was building a tower that would scrape the heavens. He had no idea he was just digging a hole. And soon, very soon, I was going to tell him to look down. For 6 months, the illusion held. The Zenith Tower began to climb, floor by floor, a steel skeleton rising from the earth. To the outside world and to Ethan, it was a symbol of progress and power. To me, it was a countdown clock. It was time to start applying pressure, It was time to introduce the cracks. The first move was geological. Through one of my shell corporations, I commissioned an independent seismological survey of the downtown area. The firm I hired was reputable, but the geologist leading the study was a man whose academic career I had quietly funded years ago. The results of his survey were, to put it mildly, alarming. They discovered a previously unmapped fault line, a minor one, but one that ran distressingly close to the Zenith Tower's foundations. The report was leaked anonymously to a single notoriously tenacious investigative journalist at the city's leading newspaper. The headline a week later was devastating. Is Zenith Tower being built on shaky ground? New report raises safety concerns. Panic erupted. The city council called an emergency session. The Department of Buildings issued an immediate stop work order on the site, pending a full review of the tower's foundational integrity. I watched Ethan's press conference on TV. He looked haggard, his usual confident smirk replaced by a tight, strained grimace. He called the report sensationalist garbage and an attack on the city's progress. He assured the public that his tower was being built to the highest possible standards. It was a lie, and we both knew it. His slightly substandard concrete and cheaper rebar might have been adequate for the original geological assessment. But with this new, albeit fabricated data, his foundations were now certifiably unsafe. The city demanded a core sample analysis. Ethan fought it, of course. He knew what they would find. He and Bianca worked frantically, filing injunctions and motions, trying to bury the order in legal red tape. But the public pressure, fanned by the flames of the media, was too intense. This was where I applied the next turn of the screw. Sebastian Lowe, on behalf of Helvetia Heritage, sent an official letter expressing grave concern. Ethan, Lowe said in their next monitored phone call, his voice laced with feigned disappointment, my employers are getting nervous. A stop work order? A safety scandal? This is not the kind of publicity we paid for. You assured us this project was solid from the ground up. It's a witch hunt, Sebastian, Ethan raged. Some crackpot geologist is trying to make a name for himself. Be that as it may, our agreement is clear, Lowe said calmly. Clause 34B. Any significant project delay due to regulatory noncompliance or safety issues constitutes a material breach. You need to fix this and fix it now. Pour whatever money is necessary into it. If that stop work order isn't lifted in 30 days, Helvetia will be forced to reconsider its position. The threat was clear. The money tap would be turned off. Ethan was trapped. He couldn't allow the city to drill those core samples. His only option was to proactively fix the problem himself. He had to reinforce the existing foundations, a colossally expensive and time-consuming undertaking. It would mean ripping out tons of concrete and steel and repouring it with the materials he should have used in the first place. The cost was astronomical. It was money the project didn't have. Helvetia, citing the breach, refused to advance another dollar until the issue was resolved. So Ethan turned to his last resort, a high-interest bridge loan from a notoriously predatory lender, a man I'll call Mr. Patron. Chen's research had identified Patron as a loan shark with ties to organized crime. He preyed on desperate developers. Getting into bed with him was a deal with the devil. And Ethan made the deal. He signed away a massive percentage of the project's future profits and, even more foolishly, used the last of Apex Global's unencumbered assets as collateral. He was now leveraged to the hilt, personally and professionally, to a man who broke legs for late payments. The work to reinforce the foundations began, a frantic, round-the-clock effort that burned through Patron's money like a wildfire. The media portrayed Ethan as a hero, a man willing to spare no expense to ensure his building was the safest in the world. He was praised for his proactive approach. I saw him on the news standing at the construction site in a hard hat, talking about his unwavering commitment to safety. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. While Ethan was distracted by his self-inflicted crisis, I moved on to the next phase, sowing discord in his camp. Bianca Reyes was not just his mistress, she was his partner in crime. Their bond was forged in ambition, not love, and bonds like that are brittle. Chen's team had been monitoring her for months. They discovered she had a secret, Before she met Ethan, she had been quietly embezzling from her previous law firm. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was enough to get her disbarred and possibly imprisoned. She had covered her tracks well, but Chen's forensic accountants were better. They unearthed the entire scheme. I had Chen package the evidence into a neat, anonymous file. It was delivered not to the authorities but to Bianca's personal email from a ghost account. The email contained no text, just the file. A ticking bomb in her inbox, the effect was immediate. Our surveillance on her showed a woman consumed by paranoia. She started shredding documents in her office. She made frantic, whispered phone calls. She started pulling away from Ethan, who was too consumed by his construction nightmare to notice the change. He saw her distraction as a lack of faith in him, and their once celebrated partnership began to fray. Arguments, overheard by Chen's bugs, became common. They were two rats in a trap, beginning to eye each other as the walls closed in. The final piece of this stage was subtle. Lily's divorce was proceeding. Ethan's lawyers, as promised, were being vicious, trying to paint her as unstable. In a deposition, they brought up a period of depression she had suffered after her mother died years ago, trying to twist it into a history of mental illness. I attended that deposition with Lily. I sat in the back of the room, my face a mask of calm. As Ethan's lawyer, a smirking weasel named Peterson, tore into my daughter's past, I caught Ethan's eye across the table. He gave me a look of pure, arrogant triumph. He thought he was winning. After the deposition, as we were leaving, I deliberately walked past him in the corridor. "You're playing a dangerous game, Ethan," I said, my voice just loud enough for him to hear. He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "The game's over, old man. You just don't know it yet. I'm the future. You're a relic. Every foundation has a breaking point, son," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "Every single one." He just shook his head and walked away, a king in a kingdom of fools. He didn't see the cracks forming all around him. The ground beneath his feet was already beginning to crumble, and the tremor was coming from my own two hands. The day I chose for the end was the anniversary of the day Ethan had proposed to Lily. A day that had once represented hope for my family would now be the day of his damnation. For weeks, Ethan had been working like a man possessed, burning through Mr. Patron's money to get the project back on track. The foundations were reinforced, the stop work order was lifted, and construction had resumed. He was exhausted, paranoid, and financially bled dry, but he believed he had weathered the storm. He thought the worst was over. He was about to find out that the storm had been nothing but a gentle spring shower. The final phase began with a single email. It was from Sebastian Lowe, on behalf of Helvetia Heritage Holdings, sent to Ethan, the Apex Board, and all of the project's primary lenders. It was the formal invocation of Clause 34B and Clause 72G of their contract, the right to an immediate, independent audit, citing concerns over budget mismanagement and the recent safety scandals. This was the kill shot. Ethan couldn't refuse the audit. It was in the contract he'd so eagerly signed, and an audit would uncover everything. The corner cutting, the creative accounting, the illegal fund transfers from other projects. It would expose him as a fraud. I was listening through the bug in his office when he read the email. The sound he made was not a word, but a guttural noise of pure animal panic. He immediately called Lowe. "Sebastian, what the hell is this?" he screamed into the phone. "An audit? Now. We're back on track. This will kill us." Lowe's voice was as cold as a morgue slab. "My employer's confidence has been shaken, Ethan. They want to see the books, all of them. The auditors arrive Monday morning." He then delivered the final scripted line I had given him. "This is no longer a negotiation. Consider all Helvetia funding frozen, effective immediately." Lowe hung up. The line went dead. Ethan was alone with the ruinous silence. The news of the audit and the funding freeze hit the financial world like a thunderclap. Apex Global's stock, already shaky, went into a freefall. The lenders, especially the secondary ones who had provided the bridge loans, panicked. Mr. Patron was the first to call in his debt. The full astronomical sum was due in 48 hours. Money Ethan didn't have. His house of cards, so carefully constructed, was collapsing in a single gust of wind. But I wasn't finished. The public humiliation had to be as complete as the financial ruin. While Ethan was desperately trying to find a financial lifeline, David Chen made two anonymous deliveries. The first was to the state's Bar Association in the district attorney's office. It was the complete file on Bianca Reyes's embezzlement from her old firm. Her career was over. A warrant would be issued for her arrest within days. The second delivery was to the investigative journalist who had broken the story about the fault line. This package contained everything else: the proof of the substandard materials used in the initial foundation pour, the falsified manifests, the internal memos proving Ethan had knowingly and illegally diverted funds. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. It wasn't just a story about corporate malfeasance. It was a story of a man who had knowingly endangered lives for profit. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in 2 years. I called Ethan. He answered on the first ring, his voice a ragged mess. "What do you want?" he spat. "I think it's time we talked, Ethan," I said calmly. "My house. 1 hour. Come alone." "I have nothing to say to you," he snarled. "Oh, I think you do," I replied. "We need to discuss Helvetia Heritage Holdings." The silence on the other end was profound. In that moment he knew. Maybe not everything, but he knew the hand of God that had descended to crush him was mine. He arrived exactly an hour later. He didn't look like a titan of industry anymore. His suit was rumpled, his eyes were wild with desperation, and he smelled of fear. I led him into my study, the very room where I had planned his demise. He stood in the middle of the room, looking around at the maps, the charts, the timelines I had pinned to a large corkboard. It was the entire battle plan of his destruction. His eyes widened as the full scope of it, the sheer, meticulous orchestration, dawned on him. "You," he whispered, his voice cracking. "It was all you. The geologist, Lowe, the audit, Helvetia." "Helvetia is a ghost, Ethan," I said, taking a seat behind my desk. "A story I wrote, and you were its main character." He stared at me, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. "Why? Why would you do this? Destroy your own investment?" "My investment?" I laughed, a cold, empty sound. "The money means nothing to me. This was never about a building. My investment was in my daughter's happiness. An investment you took and shattered and spat on. You put your hands on my daughter, Ethan." I stood up and walked over to the desk where the photo of my late wife, Helen, stood beside a more recent one of Lily, her smile radiant and pure before he had dimmed it. "You stood in my house," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "You ate at my table. You took the most precious thing in my life, and you broke her. You beat her and left her on my doorstep like a piece of trash because she discovered you were sleeping with your glorified secretary. Bianca had nothing to do with this," he pleaded, a pathetic attempt to deflect. "Oh, she did," I said with a cruel smile. "And she'll have plenty of time to reflect on her choices while she's waiting to be arraigned. I imagine orange isn't her color." The last bit of color drained from his face. He finally understood that I had left no stone unturned. No escape route. "You're a monster," he stammered. "No," I said, stepping closer until I was just inches from his face. "I am a father. You mistook my kindness for weakness. You mistook my age for irrelevance. You thought you could hurt my child and that I, an old man, would do nothing. You were wrong." He sank into a chair, his body deflating as the finality of his situation crashed down upon him. He was a king without a kingdom, a builder buried under the rubble of his own ambition. "What happens now?" he whispered, a broken man. "Now," I said, turning away from him and walking to the window that overlooked my garden. "Now you lose everything. Your company will be bankrupt by the end of the week. Your lenders will strip you of every asset you own. Mr. Patron will come for what he is owed, and he is not a patient man. The DA will likely press criminal charges for fraud and endangerment. Your name will be synonymous with failure and corruption. You will be erased." I looked back at him. He was weeping, silent tears of self-pity streaming down his face. I felt nothing. No pity, no satisfaction, just a vast, cold emptiness where my rage had been. "Get out of my house," I said. He stumbled to his feet and walked out of my study, out of my home, and out of my life. As the front door closed behind him, the grandfather clock in the hall began to chime. It was 1 a.m., the exact time months ago that Lily had collapsed on my doorstep. My revenge was complete. The scales were balanced. The aftermath was not a single explosion, but a series of controlled demolitions that leveled Ethan Cole's entire existence. Just as I had predicted, Apex Global declared bankruptcy within the week. The half-finished skeleton of the Zenith Tower, his monument to ego, stood as a stark, rusting tombstone over his career. It became a local symbol of hubris, a joke among real architects. Eventually, the city would pay to have it torn down, piece by piece. Mr. Patron did not get his money. A man like that does not write off a debt. Chen's sources reported that Ethan suffered a fall down a flight of stairs that left him with a permanent limp and a network of scars on his face that his expensive plastic surgeons couldn't quite erase, a permanent physical reminder of his failure. Bianca Reyes was arrested at her desk. The spectacle of her being led out of the Apex offices in handcuffs was the lead story on the evening news. Faced with the mountain of evidence against her, she turned on Ethan, revealing even more of their schemes in a desperate bid for a lighter sentence. She was disbarred and ultimately served 18 months in a low-security prison. Her ambition had led her to a 6-by-9-foot cell. Criminal charges were indeed filed against Ethan for corporate fraud and reckless endangerment. My lawyers fed the prosecution a steady stream of the evidence Chen had gathered. Ethan's trial was a pathetic affair. He was a ghost, a hollowed-out man who had lost everything. He was found guilty and sentenced to 7 years in prison. The name he had wanted to etch onto the city's skyline was now nothing more than a case number in the federal penitentiary system. But for me, true karma, the hardest karma, was not about his prison sentence or his financial ruin. It was more personal than that. Lily's divorce was finalized. Because Ethan's assets were either frozen or seized, she received very little in the settlement, and she was happy about it. "I don't want his money, Dad," she told me, signing the final papers with a steady hand. "I don't want anything that he touched. I just want my life back." And she got it back. The trauma of that night never fully disappeared, but it became a scar, not an open wound. She poured her pain, her anger, and her healing into her art. Her paintings transformed. The dark, chaotic canvases gave way to works of stunning resilience and beauty. A gallery owner saw her work and offered her a solo show. The opening night of her show was one of the proudest moments of my life. The gallery was filled with people, all admiring my daughter's strength and talent, translated onto canvas. She stood in the center of the room, not as a victim, but as an artist, a creator. She was radiant. One of the last pieces in the collection was a large, abstract canvas. It was a chaotic swirl of grays and blacks at the bottom, a mess of broken lines and jagged shapes. But as your eye traveled upward, the colors softened, turning to blues, then greens, and finally at the very top, a single brilliant slash of gold, like the sun breaking through the clouds. She had titled it 1 a.m. As I stood there looking at it, I felt a hand on my arm. It was Lily. "What do you think, Dad?" she asked, her eyes shining. "I think," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." I never told her the full extent of what I had done. She knew I had used my resources to help her in the divorce, but she never knew about Helvetia or Lowe or the intricate, cold-blooded architecture of Ethan's demise. She didn't need to. Her victory was not in his destruction, but in her own rebuilding. My actions had simply cleared the rubble, so she had a clean foundation to start from. My revenge brought me no joy. There was no triumphant feeling, no surge of satisfaction. When I looked at what I had done, I saw only the grim, necessary work of a father protecting his child. I had burned Ethan's world to the ground, and I had salted the earth so that nothing would ever grow there again. And I would do it all again, in a heartbeat. Because when you threaten the only thing a man has left to love, you awaken a monster. Ethan learned that lesson in the ruins of his life. He wanted to build a legacy, and in the end he did. He will forever be a part of my legacy, a footnote in the story of a father's love. That night, looking at my daughter's painting, I finally understood. My revenge wasn't the tower of steel and glass I had tempted Ethan with. It was my daughter, standing tall and whole, her spirit shining brighter than any skyscraper. His punishment isn't just the prison cell or the poverty. It's the knowledge that he tried to extinguish a beautiful light, and instead only made it burn with more brilliance. He lost everything, while we rebuilt everything that truly mattered. This story is a testament to the fact that true strength isn't about how high you can build, but how you rise after you've been knocked to the ground. It's about the fierce, unending love of a parent that can become the most powerful force for justice on earth. If this story resonated with you, if you believe that karma sometimes needs a helping hand, then please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Let me know in the comments below. What would you do to protect the ones you love? Thank you for listening.